Hello, hi, welcome to Alta Live. My name is Beth Spotswood, and I am the digital editor at Alta Journal. I am so excited to welcome you all here for today's conversation with poet Mike Sonksen. I have had the absolute pleasure of seeing Mike in both Seattle and Los Angeles recently. And both times I walked away from our conversation in a better mood. I thought to myself, I have got to get this guy on Alta Live just to hear Mike's thoughts of the moment. In fact, we've been trying to kind of work with his schedule for months to get him here. Now, we won't be that vague. Mike won't just be sharing his thoughts of the day with us today, but I do want to talk to Mike about his passion for his hometown of LA, the city's extraordinary community of poets, writers, and artists, and how we might join it, support it, be a part of it. About our guest, Mike Sonksen, aka Mike the Poet, is a third-generation Angelino. Poet, professor, journalist, historian, and tour guide. Mike teaches at Woodbury University and serves as the program coordinator for the school's first-year experience program. He has published over 500 essays and poems with the Academy of American Poets, Alta Journal, PBS, LA Weekly, OC Weekly, LA Review of Books, Angel City Review, LA Taco, and so many more. Over the past 20 years, Mike has delivered more than 2,000 poetry readings across the country. He's been a guest speaker at over 100 universities and high schools and presented his poetry on public radio and TV. In 2013, the Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center honored Mike for his distinguished service to the LA poetry community. And so we're gonna have fun today. Like, Mike is an absolute delight, and I'm really excited to talk to him. Before we get there, though, I want to make a hard pitch for Alta. Alta Live is the digital event series we do here at Alta Journal. If you are unfamiliar with Alta, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West. You can join us as a member for as little as $3 a month and support the work we do, including our monthly California book club, which is free and very fun to join. In fact, tomorrow night, we welcome Percival Everett to talk about telephone. We present weekly events like this. We do in-person events. In fact, in San Francisco on May 30th, we're hosting a reading, an event, an issue party at Green Apple Books. In Culver City, LA people, on June 22nd, we're having an event at Village Well. Free, open to all. Please join us. We will send you invitations to that. So if you're up for it, please do consider joining Alta Journal as a member. It is so great to be here with our community today. Please drop in the chat where you're zooming in from. It's always fun to see where our crowd is coming in from. Questions for Mike, put those in the chat or use the Q&A button as well. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later today. Keep an eye peeled for your email. We'll shoot you that in an email, as well as links to Mike's work, where to buy his books, and anything else that pops up today, including invites to those parties. So I am in Novato, California. I am not in LA. Mike, please tell me that you are.
I am in Monterey Park as we speak right now.
Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, Pasadena, Glendale, Maryland, Glassell Park, LA, Fresno, Cupertino. It's great to see everyone. All right, Mike, I wanted to start. I know you've agreed to read some poetry for us today, but before we begin, I want to start by talking about Los Angeles, your hometown. When I was in LA last month, your name came up, or actually, more accurately, it was shouted across the table by like a collection of writers just singing your praises. As someone who is a genuine champion of the city. And I think someone said something along the lines of, you're not allowed to complain about LA unless you love it as much as Mike. Can you talk a little bit about your passion for Los Angeles?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Beth. Number one, I'm so happy to be here, and I love writing for Alta, and what a great California journal. And there was a great quote Nelson Algren had in his book about Chicago City on the Make. And he said, in order to really critique a place, you have to really love it. And Nelson Algren's book, Chicago City on the Make, which was in 1951, was banned in the city of Chicago, but it was actually a love poem to Chicago. And so I've always loved Algren's work, but LA is a beautiful, complicated place, and it is massive. And I know we have our traffic, and there's many things to critique about it, but most of all, I love the people and I love all the different neighborhoods. And I'm every time I think I know something, I discover another little neighborhood that I didn't know about. Or a lot of it was, some of my love of it came from my stories of my grandfather, but some of it came from doing poetry in a million different little neighborhoods. And some of it was in my 20s, I had a lot of different jobs and would go to different places. And you were always discovering another little nook and cranny, or going to this gallery, or I used to go to a lot of live music events and all of these different places. And like there's this little place called Kenneth Village in Glendale, and it's up against the Verdugo Mountains, kind of in between Glendale and Burbank. And there's a million little pockets, downtown Alhambra, and little places in Torrance in the South Bay and the San Gabriel Valley, and downtown Whittier, uptown Whittier, and Monrovia. And it's so much more than, Sunset Boulevard and the hipster neighborhoods, but these little different quaint neighborhoods. And over the years, there was always a little poetry event and some coffee house, or I was even being invited by a friend somewhere. And so those pockets and those villages and those neighborhoods, a lot of that, and of course the food as well. But my love of LA, a lot of it just came from pounding the pavement and running around.
Interesting. Just, going to seek out these opportunities to be part of an arts community kind of fostered your love of your hometown.
Mhm.
But I think I read something, actually, a profile of you in LA Taco, shout out to LA Taco, that your grandfather, you mentioned him briefly, would drive you around LA and kind of share his history of the city with you. Your family has a long history in LA.
So much of everything comes back to my grandfather. And actually, er- the whole birth of my love of LA started with my grandfather. And when he would talk to me about the Great Depression and the streetcars and the railroads, and oh, you used to be able to see the mountains, and all kinds of things. And now sometimes you can see the mountains again, thanks the air quality is actually better than it was in the 80s. But when I was young, my grandfather and I would take all these drives, sometimes just after school, and he would tell me about growing up in LA. And he'd attended both Jefferson High School and then Fremont High School, and he had played some music. He even played the drums a little bit in some jazz groups, and he did that until in his mid to late 30s, and then later on he was just playing the piano. But he was an old Angelino, and so was my dad's father as well, who passed when I was a little bit younger. But my parents, and so a lot of my family history initially was from these stories and learning about all these things and different firsthand stories. And then by the time I got to UCLA in the early 90s and started reading Mike Davis and studying and meeting people, shout out to Linnell George too, because I used to read a lot of her pieces in the LA Weekly, and before I had even met her. And so I was reading all of these people, and all of a sudden these stories I grew up hearing started meaning even more, and saying, I'd always, number one, just loved my grandfather, and he was a very charismatic guy. But then when you start reading these other historical accounts and these narrative stories that are not only affirming the things that you've heard before, but making me dive in even deeper. And I was recently writing about how Chick Hearn and Vin Scully were a big part of my LA education. I remember hearing Vin Scully, the Dodgers announcer, talking about the Santa Ana winds blowing in over Chavez Ravine when I was, 8, 9, 10 years old. And later on, of course, I get to UCLA and I learn more about what the Santa Ana winds really are, and what Chavez Ravine was, and how it was this neighborhood of close to 10,000 people, and how that neighborhood was what ended up happening with the erasure of that neighborhood, and how Dodger Stadium was eventually built there. But initially, I just thought Chavez Ravine was this romantic thing that that Vin Scully would talk about, and the Santa Ana winds blowing in over the foothills of Chavez Ravine. So there's always these layers of learning history. There's sort of this romantic first learning of it when you're younger, and then you kind of start to dive deeper and deeper and deeper, and then you find out there's a heck of a lot more to it. But initially, I sort of had the sort of the poet romantic love of it, and then as I got older and older and older, and I started reading more and more books, there's always so many layers to things, and everything
Sure.
is really like an iceberg. But it all started from family stories, and that was the beginning of it.
And you started writing poetry when you were a kid?
Yeah, I mean, I had an amazing fourth grade teacher, and actually, I wrote about her in my book, Letters to My City. My fourth grade teacher was this woman, Miss Navarrete, who was just incredible, and she had done a thing with the UCLA Writers Project. UCLA had this summer mentorship program where it was very elite to get into, and they would mentor teachers about how to teach writing, and my fourth grade teacher had been a part of that, and so she even took us on a field trip to UCLA when I was in the fourth grade, and that was when I decided I wanted to go there. And sure enough, 10 years later, I did. But so I wrote a little bit of poems in her class, and I wrote a little bit in high school, but it was really my freshman year at UCLA in the fall of 1992 when I really started writing a bunch of poems. And a lot of it was my friends and I going to art shows in Melrose and Runyon Canyon and Topanga Canyon and Venice Beach and Griffith Observatory, and just running all over the city and writing a lot. Initially, it was just also I was reading Kerouac, and we were kind of under the spell of Bukowski and the Beats and the Harlem Renaissance. Langston Hughes and Allen Ginsberg, all these guys were my early influences. And then, of course, you kind of keep diving deeper and deeper and deeper. But it started with this sort of youthful enthusiasm.
Shout out to Miss Navarette too.
Yeah, Miss Navarette was the one.
Would you be willing to read something for us?
Yeah, okay. I'm alive in Los Angeles. Is it the sunshine or the catastrophes, flash floods of the traffic? Something about Los Angeles makes music, makes magic. The music of Los Angeles makes artists get active. Behold the lore of LA authors. Behold who's rocking the populace in the postmodern metropolis, LA authors. And I'm alive in Los Angeles. I'm alive in Los Angeles. I'm alive in Los Angeles. I'm alive in Los Angeles here in the wild, wild west. And as a warm wind hits my face, I walk across stained concrete. I cry tears of joy on Flower Street. I watch families dancing on their porches on Christmas Eve. I smile widely, and as I move through the city, my heart beats swiftly as sirens speed by me. I revel in the sadness. My soul is deep. I take full responsibility. Give me everything. It hurts. It's so beautiful. We have that universal, soulful, multicultural, emerging worldwide tribe people. I'm alive in Los Angeles. I'm alive in Los Angeles. I'm alive in Los Angeles. I'm alive in Los Angeles, where there are more angles than isosceles, citywide topographies undulate across massive landscape. We move from chain link to palatial gates into separate economic states with rising birth rates below hilltops in the streetscapes. One can barely even equivocate these fluctuations in rent that are so evident all across, from block to block to block to block. Extravagance and adversity interlock. Palatial spots, crosswalks, burrito shops, housekeepers are hanging out at bus stops. The country club is all walled off, and the city's blowing up like a Molotov. Even when I'm in the shower, I'm hearing the horns honk. I'm alive in Los Angeles. I'm alive in Los Angeles. I'm alive in Los Angeles. LA.
Yes. Do we snap for poetry? Yes. It was spectacular.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing that. Oh, everyone, the fans in the crowd. That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
You've written several times for Alta. I want to kind of get into the community that you so celebrate, and you seem to be a real connector of people, a celebrator of your fellow artists. I tried to join that today by giving Roman's Bookstore indie bookseller a shout out, one of our good friends in LA. But you wrote for Alta's newsletter about Los Angeles-based mural artist. Can you tell us a little bit? One of the kind of original ways I wanted you to come on Alta Live was to bring Man One, but we can't get him yet. We will one day. Can you we'll share some of his work, and can you tell us a little bit about this LA artist and the kind of community of writers, poets, artists that are thriving right now while I share my screen?
So my most recent essay for Alta was about Man One, the muralist and gallery owner known as Alex Pauly, aka Man One. And Man One is a really fantastic artist who's done murals all over Southern California. And for that matter, he's done murals up in Berkeley. He recently did something in Nepal. I mean, he's done work everywhere. This is from his project at the Cedar Grove, formerly known as the Jordan Downs Housing Project in Watts. And this is called the Faces of Watts. And his work is really about celebrating people in the city. And he owned a gallery called Cruist Gallery for 10 years, where I had several poetry events in the early 2000s. And Man One is not only a prolific muralist, this is the one I believe he did overseas in Nepal. He's not only a prolific muralist, but he's given a bunch of young artists their first break as a gallery owner. And so he and I have connected both on our love of LA and also on this idea of passing the baton. And so there's many artists who had their first show with Man One at Cruist Gallery. And for a long time, it was there was a moratorium, even though LA was once the mural capital of the world, there was actually a moratorium on murals in LA for 10 years. From about 2003 until 2012, 2013, murals were banned in LA, even though in the 70s and 80s, LA was the mural capital of the world. And so for about a 10-year period, his gallery, Cruist Gallery, was one of the only places that you could really see murals and graffiti art in an official capacity. And so Man One and I have connected on a lot of projects. He did a project with Louis McAdams from the Friends of the LA River in 2007, where they painted a bunch of murals along the river. This is at the US Bank building, which is a 73-story building. And there is also now a bunch of murals on the 72nd floor in a gallery space at the top of the US Bank building. And Man One curated a project at the US Bank building with 8 other muralists as well, several other great award-winning muralists. And so he's not only doing incredible work himself, but he's putting other people on. And so we both love LA. This is Noni Alabizi. This is Man One's tribute to Noni Alabizi, who is one of the most prolific women muralists of LA, who passed unfortunately last year. And very influential woman, Noni Alabizi, incredible, incredible muralist. And this was his tribute to her. And I believe Isabel Rojas Williams, who is a mural historian, is getting ready to do a book and getting ready to do a whole project celebrating the work of Noni Alabizi, because Noni passed unexpectedly last year. And so Man One paid tribute to her, and I met her just a few times, and what an incredible woman she was. And so Man One's work is not only about LA, but he recognizes other people, and he's always looking to use his art as a greater vehicle to celebrate people, issues of social justice, of course, too, and also somebody like Noni Alabizi who should be even more remembered. So I'm always happy to run into Man One and to collaborate with him.
Yeah, and we can send everyone a link to Mike's article, his newsletter for Alta about Man One. But I think to your point about Man One, and I think it's true for yourself, you've been mentored by many great writers, poets, artists, as have other artists like Man One, and you're kind of continuing to like pay it forward, to pass it on. It seems like such an important part of your, I want to say, personality. I mean, I haven't spent that much time around you, but every time I've seen you, you are bringing other people along. You've got other poets and artists. You're promoting other people's work, specifically artwork, and talking about how great they are. And every time you leave, everyone talks about how fantastic and wonderful and lovely you are. And I'm curious, is this something that you do intentionally? Is this community of artists and writers, poets, etc., in LA, are you actively inclusive? Is that kind of a part of your ethos?
Yeah, I love the community spirit idea, and I really learned about it from a few people. I always talk about Horace Tapscott, which was one of my very first pieces I did for Alta, the Pan African People Orchestra. Horace Tapscott, the pianist and the conductor. I heard him speak right around the same time that I studied with Mike Davis, and so like I always say, kind of two of my North Stars and helping to form my values as a poet and an educator and writer and journalist were both Mike Davis and Horace Tapscott. Horace Tapscott said that art is contributive, not competitive. And when I was beginning in the poetry scene and as a writer, sometimes I was places where there was more kind of ego and a cattiness that could kind of rub you the wrong way sometimes. And at the same time, I had studied with Mike Davis, and when I was in Mike Davis's class, he would have students talk to each other. One of our first assignments in his class was that he made us interview each other, and we were to write articles about one another. And so I loved that, and I wrote an article about a really great dude, and that ended up becoming my friend. But so this idea of celebrating other people, I found that through the community, and I have a great friend who's now in New York, my buddy Philip Martin, aka Phil Harmonic, and Phil and I did poetry together for 15 plus years before he moved to the East Coast. And so early on, I learned that if you find a few people that you can really work closely with, you can really build one another up. But not only that, you expand the circle, and you're trading books. And some days when you're kind of tired, your friend is lifting you up, and some days you're lifting them up. And so that community spirit, when I heard Horace Tapscott talk about art as a community and it's more about being contributive, and then I saw how Mike Davis he would give us books, and he invited us over to his house for pizza, and here he was, this award-winning writer, and I had been reading him for 3+ years before I studied with him, and so I was really looking up to him. But then I met him, and first question, I was real young and earnest, and I said, Mike, where's your office? And he said, where's the closest bar? And he was pretty funny. But he did have us over to his house for pizza, and he would stay after class and talk to us. And if you wanted to have him sign a book or something, he would do it for you, but he was even uncomfortable with you being too fawning over him. He was just more like, hey, call me Mike. He wasn't pretentious at all. And so people like Horace Tapscott and Mike Davis, and then later on down the line, Juan Coleman, Luis Rodriguez, Louis McAdams, these different poets and these other people that I met, almost all of them, I had been reading them for a few years before I met them, but they were all so down to earth, and it gave me a model for how to be. And then when I started teaching, I still do assignments in my class, a couple of assignments that Mike Davis had our class do 25 years ago.
Oh, really? That's awesome. I want to ask, I've got a question that I want to make sure we get time for from Linnell George, who is an Alta contributor, and I know a friend of yours, Mike. She wants to know about your walking and history tours of LA. How do you settle on the locations, and how do you prepare for them? Also, she has a part 3. How do they fit into your writing practice?
You know what? My dog, hold on, my dog is that. Okay. Can repeat the question about the last part of the walking tour question?
Okay, so she wants to know how do you settle on the locations? How do you prepare for them? And how do they fit into your writing practice?
The walking tours have been a big part of my life. And for many years, I used to work for Redline Tours, and we used to do walking tours, especially in downtown LA and in Hollywood. And Redline Tours, shout out to 2 guys, a guy named Tony Hoover and a guy named Philip Ferentinos. They had these really elaborate walking tours. And I had already done some tour guiding anyway. But so Tony Hoover had all kinds of architectural history, and I had almost went to graduate school in urban planning. So I had read a lot about the city history, and I was always interested in it. But as I started doing walking tours myself, so much of it was about, you would choose 4, 5, 6, 7 locations. And when we were doing downtown, one of my favorite walking tours, we used to go from Little Tokyo to the Disney Concert Hall. And then there was another one we would do from Grand Park to the Central Library. And you would choose several locations, like the Central Library, for example. You can spend 30, 40 minutes in the Central Library. There's these murals on the ceiling. There's this incredible chandelier. There's this whole atrium. And so there was a lot of great points to talk about. The Central Library, oftentimes we would end the tour there. And so one of the other walking tours I did in downtown, we were at the Bradbury Building, and right next to the Bradbury Building is Biddy Mason State Park. And there's an amazing story about this woman named Biddy Mason. And so each location, you can have 10 to 15 minutes worth of things to talk about. And some of giving a tour is bullet points. Some of it is choosing very specific things to talk about. Maybe who was the architect, but was there a story behind how the building was created? But also sometimes there's some deeper stories. And some of the walking tours is maybe it's 75 minutes, maybe it's 90 minutes. I mean, I've even done 3 and 4 hour walking tours, but I found the magic number is about 90 minutes. And maybe on a 90-minute tour, you have 6, 7 things to talk about, and you're walking and talking. And then sometimes at the end, we get into a discussion, and I like to leave space for people on the tour, because I've learned things from people on the tour. Sometimes I've been doing a tour and somebody's like, well, I used to live in this neighborhood in the 60s, and they tell you something too. So there's a lot to talk, a lot of dialogue, and it's great.
How do you decide when you're doing your own tours? How do you decide the locations? How do you map that out?
You definitely got to walk the route. And one of these guys I used to do a tour guiding with is shout out to this British dude named Mick King. And Mick used to say, time spent in reconnaissance is never time wasted. And so all the
Okay.
neighborhoods that I used to do tours of, you know, you spend a lot of time in them. And a lot of times they're neighborhoods where I had a job in already, or I used to do a lot of poetry in that neighborhood, or I had a lot of history in that neighborhood. And so you're walking the route, you're walking the route, you're, I would sit on the street and write, you know, and do a lot of research and reading books, and a combination of both the physical research and reading, and a mixture of both. I think you can never, nothing replaces the experience of being in the neighborhood physically. A combination of that and the reading. I like to do both the research on the feet on the ground, and of course, reading books and everything.
That's awesome. And so in terms of like, are you still doing tours in addition to your teaching, your writing, performing?
I'm going to do a tour this Sunday. The LA Review of Books is doing a series of tours for Mike Davis, and I'm doing two tours. I'm doing a 3 o'clock tour and a 4 o'clock tour. This is just going to be a little half-hour walking tour on Sunset Boulevard in the Sunset Junction area. There was a bar called the Black Cat Bar, which was one of the first places in America to ever have a demonstration for gay rights in the late 60s. And Mike Davis wrote about it in his last book, Set the Night on Fire. And so I'm going to be doing two walking tours this Sunday, the 21st. And I still do some tours. I mean, I did them full time a lot more when I'm in my 20s and early 30s, and I'm mostly teaching now, but I've done so many tours for so many years that I'm always doing a few tours. Rarely goes a month or 2 months without me doing at least a tour or two somewhere. And then I'm going to be doing some tours this summer as well.
I just found this online. We will include a link to that for anyone who is presuming there's space on Sunday for folks that want to join up. A couple of, I'll kind of ask a broader question here. Someone wants to know if you could recommend favorite poets or authors with kind of a sense of humor, an absurdist sense of humor, or any satirists. But I'm also kind of curious if you could, who do we not know about? Can you pick three? And I realize that your Rolodex, as it were, is gigantic of people that we should know about it. But can you toss us three names for us to go find on Instagram or wherever?
Okay. Let me think. There's so many to talk about, so many different people. You know, there are so many great poets and writers in LA. It's well, you know, a great writer, Bridget Bianca is a great up and coming poet right now in LA. She's doing really wonderful work. Bridget Bianca is doing a lot of great work. She's also a professor at Santa Monica College. I want to give a shout out to Chi-Wan Choi, who's my publisher from Writ Large Press. But Chi-Wan speaks three languages: Korean, English, and Spanish. And he's from Koreatown in LA. And Chi-Wan has done a lot of great poetry in LA, but also published a lot of people. Let me see here. My buddy F. Douglas Brown. Doug Brown is an award-winning English teacher from Loyola High School, but Doug is also originally born in San Francisco, and he's an award-winning poet, and he's done a lot of California poetry and a lot of. He's also a great DJ. So Doug Brown is a great poet, and so many different people. I mean, my students actually. Dante Mitchell is a young up and coming MC and rapper, and he was a poet in my class 15 years ago, and now he's become family to me. And his little sister, Monique Mitchell, is a heck of a poet. Dante Mitchell and Monique Mitchell are really, really talented. And another former student of mine, a kid named Chris Siders, who's now doing a lot of spoken word events at different colleges all around California. And there's just endless names. There's so many more to say, but.
Okay, those are six.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, we're going to try and find links to all of those people and send them to you, so you can go off and explore, spend the summer finding really cool LA artists that Mike wants to lift up. We are at 1 o'clock. Mike, before we go, I'm wondering if you would do us the honor of reciting one more poem.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to do the poem about Mike Davis that was published in Alta in October. So, in the land of the lost mammoths with pirates, bats, and dragons, in praise of barbarians, you saw Hollywood's dark shadow. Heading south of No North through the city of courts, you set the night on fire in Echo Park, a generation after they called it Red Hill. You found your thrills listening to Dorothy Healy at 84th in Vermont. Then you hit Pogo Swamp to listen to Levi Kingston's intergenerational swing and ascension. You drove a Gray Line tour bus while reading Kara McWilliams with Filipino tourists. You annotated the diagram of the silver geriatrics who tried to kill Los Angeles. After attending UCLA, you split fast to Belfast to escape and write about prisoners of the American dream. Reagan's magical mystery tour du jour, the war on drugs, unlocked the hammer and the rock. You called their bluff a year before Rodney was struck. Driving a big rig truck seemed like it could be sustaining, but you found your calling Fortress Architecture and the LAPD for what they are, sunshine and noir. You were even there the day the sheriffs executed Ruben Salazar inside the Silver Dollar by Laguna Park on Whittier Boulevard. While the world watched LA turn, you presented the case for letting Malibu burn. You excavated dead cities and late Victorian holocausts. You demonstrated that the antidote to ecology of fear is magical urbanism. Let's not forget the rise of the coronavirus, 15 years before you saw the monster at our door. From the flames of New York to Dante's Inferno, your voice so sharp you asked who would build the ark. In 1997, after I read as much of your work as I could, I took your class, The Emerging Latino Metropolis at UCLA in my final quarter before graduating. You helped reveal layers of identity so we could remember we. Your footnotes, the rope, I used to climb into LA history. I read at least a dozen authors I saw quoted in your prose. You invited us into your home and shared outlines of your essays so we could write our own someday. That poem is for Mike Davis.
What a legacy he has left in you and in your work and so many other people's. But it's just a beautiful tribute. And thank you for sharing that with Alta's readers in October when he passed. And thank you, Mike. That's
thank you, Beth. Thank you. It was so fun to be here. And shout out to everybody watching. Lots of love. Dante, everybody. Stephen, everybody out there. Kilana, Ashton, love to everybody. And build the bridge, lay down the bricks, fill in the ridges, stack the sticks, feed the fire, consider the cost, take it up high. The city is ours. LA.
Love it.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you.
All right, wait, before you go, I want to invite you again, June 22nd, if you're in LA, we'll be at Village Well in Culver City. May 30th and 2 Tuesdays, Green Apple on the Park in San Francisco. Next week, May 24th, we're welcoming Blythe Robertson with her hilarious new memoir. It's a road trip memoir called America the Beautiful? ? So anyway, we'll send you an invite for that. Again, Mike, you are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much. Thank you. Love to everybody, and to be continued.
Yes, please. Thank you. Take care, all.